Historically, government has regulated media sectors in different ways, and some media have been regulated more heavily than other media. More specifically, there's a key distinction between print and broadcast media. Broadcast media, television stations and radio stations, have historically been regulated much more heavily than print media, like newspapers, magazines, and book publishing. And the reason for this difference has to do with the justification that the U.S. government has historically provided for regulation of broadcast media. Historically, way back to the 1920s and 30s, the U.S. government has made the case that broadcast media make use of a scarce public resource, that TV and radio stations transmit their signals using the airwaves, the electromagnetic spectrum. And there's only so much of these airwaves. There's only so many frequencies that a station can use to transmit a signal. Because of this scarcity of the airwaves, the U.S. government argued that this was an important public resource that should be regulated by the government on behalf of the American public that collectively own the airwaves. All right, so the airwaves are not only scarce, but they're something that they are owned by all of us, not just any one broadcast company. In contrast to this, print media, newspapers and magazines, have historically enjoyed a much greater degree of First Amendment protection and free speech. Print media like newspapers and magazines have not been subject to this kind of more enhanced regulation that TV stations and radio stations have been subject to. Now, these differing types of regulation are made clear in two key Supreme Court decisions that really highlight the different kind of regulation for broadcast versus print media. The first case is Red Lion Broadcasting versus the Federal Communications Commission. In the case for Red Lion Broadcasting, Red Lion was a small radio station in Pennsylvania, and on one of the shows that was aired on this radio station, a host attacked an author, Fred Cook, all right, and said some nasty things about this guy, Fred Cook. Well, as a result of these attacks, this author, Fred Cook, requested time on the Red Lion station to be heard and respond to some of these attacks, and he wanted free airtime for this response. All right, Red Lion objected to this, saying that it had no obligation to let this guy Cook come on and say his piece, because Red Lion was a private business, a private broadcaster. Right. Well, the FCC and then the U.S. Supreme Court disagreed with Red Lion and argued that the station did have an obligation to let Fred Cook on to respond to these attacks, right? And the Supreme Court said that Cook had this right because radio broadcasters did not have complete First Amendment free speech rights, but rather the radio broadcasters were using a public resource, the airwaves, and as a result, they had a responsibility to the local community, and that their responsibility to serve the public interest in this case outweighed their right to choose their own programming. All right, so Red Lion Broadcasting really made clear that broadcasters had a lesser degree of First Amendment protection, and that instead radio stations and TV stations had more of an obligation to serve the public interest, and that provided the justification for the government requiring these radio or TV stations to do certain things that were in the public interest. Now, you had kind of a similar case in Miami Herald Publishing versus Tornillo, right? Here, too, you had a media outlet that said some bad things about somebody, and then the person who was attacked wanted a right to respond. In this case, we're talking about a newspaper, the Miami Herald, and the Miami Herald published an editorial where it came out to say that it was opposing the person, Pat Tornillo, who was running for a public office, all right? So, an editorial against Tornillo. Well, Pat Tornillo objected to this, and he requested the Miami Herald to let him have some space to reply to the editorial. He said that he should have a right to respond to the claims that the Miami Herald made in that editorial, and he should have the right to make the case for his candidacy. Well, the Miami Herald objected to this and said that they had no obligation as a business or a newspaper to give him this space to respond. So Tornillo sued the Miami Herald for the right to respond to this editorial. Well, just to cut to the chase, the Supreme Court sided with the Miami Herald and said that the newspaper did not have any obligation to provide this right to respond to their editorial. And their reasoning was that the Miami Herald, as a newspaper, as a private newspaper, has these First Amendment free speech rights, all right? And those free speech First Amendment rights give the Miami Herald the right to control the content of its own newspaper. So the Supreme Court ruled that the right to reply law was unconstitutional for newspapers, that lower law that gave this right of reply was unconstitutional. So more generally, then these two court cases really illustrate for us the differing degrees of government oversight and regulation of print and electronic media or broadcasting, right? Whereas print has a higher degree of First Amendment protection, broadcasting, radio, and television has a lesser degree of First Amendment protection because that is limited by their obligations to serve the public interest. As I mentioned in the previous slide, broadcasting is subject to greater government regulation than other media sectors like the traditional print media. One area in which broadcasting has been subject to greater regulation is in the area of indecent speech. Now, indecent speech has been hard to define, but pragmatically, examples of indecent speech usually come down to a swear word, a vulgarity, or some sexually explicit image, like a woman's breast. Broadcasters have been subject to penalties and pretty steep fines for any instances of indecent speech that they broadcast, either through their audio or visual images. Now, it's important to distinguish between indecent speech and what we talked about earlier, obscenity. All right? Obscenity also usually involves media content that is sexually explicit. However, something is not considered obscene unless the entire piece of work is labeled obscene. And as we talked about earlier, there is a pretty extensive system for making that determination, that something isn't obscene unless it lacks artistic or cultural value. In contrast to the standard for obscenity, for indecency, indecent speech, all you have to do is pick out some individual word or image that is considered indecent. All right, you can't do that with obscenity because you can't just call attention to one particular image or word. You have to look at the work as a whole. In indecent speech, there is no such burden. A station, a radio or TV station, can be fined for indecent speech if there is any isolated swear word or vulgarity or sexually explicit image that is broadcast. And over the years, the Federal Communications Commission has been pretty aggressive in terms of fining television stations and radio stations for indecent speech. In the 1990s, when Howard Stern was on regular commercial radio, his station, his network got fined a lot because obviously Stern was constantly pushing the envelope in terms of sexually explicit material. And some of you may also remember the infamous Super Bowl performance by Janet Jackson in 2004 when Janet showed us all her pierced nipple, which got the TV network into some hot water there. So there have regularly been fines and uproars about these instances of indecent speech. Now, more recently, the Federal Communications Commission has carved out a part of the broadcast day where indecent speech is more tolerated. Typically, the hours of 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. Are a time of day when indecent speech is not allowed because of the concern that young children with vulnerable ears might be listening or watching TV shows during that time. Indecent speech is tolerated more later at night, after 10 p.m. and until 6 a.m. When we at least suppose that younger children are in bed and that there is a more adult audience for media content.